A headline breaks through the noise. A United States aircraft lands in Caracas, and an entire bilateral tension map shifts again. Here's the hook. A flight under a national flag touches down in the late afternoon, carrying more than 260 travelers whose lives have been suspended between administrative decisions, political messaging, and a process that keeps changing its tone every few days. And this new landing doesn't just complete a route. It exposes a contradiction inside a bigger story. Two nations saying two different things, two narratives pulling in opposite directions, and real people stuck in the middle. Subscribe right now, hit that bell, because what you're about to hear isn't noise. It's the pulse of a conflict disguised as routine procedure. The aircraft arrived around 5:15 in the evening at the main international airport serving Caracas, located in La Guaira. A routine landing on paper, but absolutely nothing about this moment feels routine. On board traveled more than 260 Venezuelan nationals who had been held in the United States due to administrative status issues. For months, these flights have functioned like a bridge held together by political thread, a fragile agreement between Washington and Caracas, intended to manage returns in a structured way. But the structure broke last weekend, or at least it looked like it did when the President of the United States published a statement suggesting that Venezuelan airspace was being shut down. That message hit like a hammer, not because of its wording but because of the implications. If the airspace closure were real, flights of repatriation would be suspended immediately. The same flights that had been requested by the current United States administration earlier this year. Caracas responded fast, calling the announcement improper and warning that the flights would be affected. Then everything went silent. A silence full of tension. A silence that forced both governments to recalculate. But then, a twist. Officials in Venezuela said they received a message on Monday indicating that flights should resume. And by Tuesday, a formal communication confirmed authorization for the continuity of the repatriation system. That's why the aircraft landed today. That's why another chapter opened in a story that refuses to stay still. The Venezuelan foreign minister explained it bluntly during a press statement. This recent landing represents flight number 76 received from the United States under this bilateral process. With today's arrival, the total number of people who have returned through this route surpasses 14,400. Those numbers matter, not because they are statistics but because they show a pattern, a repetition, a constant cycle of departures and returns shaped by diplomatic tension. So let's slow down and analyze the human layer underneath these calculations. 266 people returning to their home country after spending days or weeks in administrative holding centers. Lives paused, plans interrupted, a future suddenly redirected. All of this happening while two governments argue publicly about airspace, authorization, legitimacy, and policy alignment. The strange part is this. The flights were never officially suspended. They just hovered in limbo, caught between a statement on social media and the political machinery behind closed doors. And that limbo reveals something critical. Decisions made at the top ripple downward into the daily experience of people who have zero control over those shifts. Look at the timeline. At the end of January, an envoy from the United States visited Caracas. Meetings happened. Agreements were drafted. Two central points emerged: restart repatriation flights and advanced discussions regarding several U.S. nationals held in Venezuela at the time. It was a political exchange, a negotiation between pressures, each side trying to secure a concession. And then for months of tension, 4 months of announcements and counter-announcements, 4 months of a relationship that refuses to stabilize. That is the real context behind today's landing. Not just a flight, not just a number, but a reminder of how uneasy the bridge between both nations is. A bridge constantly shaken by internal politics, diplomatic disagreements, and public messaging that often contradicts operational reality. Now imagine what the passengers on today's flight felt during these last days. Imagine hearing that the airspace might be closed. Imagine not knowing if the return was delayed, cancelled, or transformed into something else. Imagine trying to understand messages posted online by political authorities while your own life is being reorganized without your input. That emotional uncertainty is the invisible cost of these decisions, the part no government acknowledges, the part no official press release can soften. And yet, the flights resumed. The process continues with a regular pattern on Wednesdays and Fridays. But continuity does not mean stability. Not when each chapter is surrounded by political tension. Not when a single message can shake the entire structure. So let's go deeper, because this isn't just a logistical update. This is a window into how geopolitical friction transforms into human tension. The United States claims the repatriation flights are part of a long-term strategy. Venezuela claims the flights are part of a bilateral negotiation tied directly to diplomatic concessions. Both narratives overlap, but neither fully explains the emotional impact on the people inside the aircraft. 266 today. More than 14,400 already returned. 76 total flights to date. These travelers carry stories that no government statistic can describe. Some left years ago, Some left months ago. Some hoped for a future in the United States that got redirected by administrative processes beyond their control. When the President of the United States posted the message implying closure of Venezuelan airspace, uncertainty spiked instantly for travelers, families, and even for airport authorities in both countries. Because when major announcements appear suddenly, especially on social media, operational teams scramble to understand what has changed and what remains intact. And this time, what changed was not the flight. What changed was trust. Trust between institutions, trust between governments, trust between people in the system responsible for their mobility. Even after the clarification, the damage was done. People returned to a familiar emotional state, not knowing what comes next, not knowing if the next flight will depart, not knowing if the next announcement will shift policy again. That uncertainty is more powerful than any diplomatic statement. And here's the deeper layer. Every repatriation flight carries a political message. It says something about who has leverage. It says something about which agreements remain active. It says something about what each government wants the world to see. This is not just about aircraft and passengers. It's about narrative ownership. And today's narrative is this. Despite public contradictions, despite online announcements, despite diplomatic tension, the flights continue. The agreement still stands. The bridge remains open, though shaking. Now pay attention to something that most channels ignore: the choreography of contradiction. When a government announces something that appears absolute, but operational reality contradicts it within 48 hours, the public is left confused. That confusion weakens confidence in institutions. It amplifies fear. It creates social tension that can outlive the political moment. This flight doesn't erase that damage. It highlights it. So here's the express analysis for you. As the city of Caracas watches each landing with a mixture of relief and curiosity, the bilateral relationship between Washington and Caracas is not collapsing, but it is unstable. Every announcement carries two meanings: the public meaning and the operational meaning, and those two meanings rarely align. The operational reality says, flights continue. The public narrative says, tensions rising, and the people returning, the human center of this entire situation, live in the space between those two versions. That space is where the real story sits. Don't think about the magnitude. Behind 14,400 returns, that number is not just a statistic of movement. It is an emotional map of a population experiencing the impact of global politics firsthand. Think about 76 flights. That is not just a schedule. It is a timeline of diplomatic stress stitched together with fragile agreements. And think about 266 people arriving today. That is not a crowd. That is a set of individual lives, each with a pause, each with an expectation, each with an abrupt shift. If you want the truth, here it is. This moment is not about who wins politically. This moment is about how unpredictable leadership decisions ricochet through the lives of everyday people. And before this flight landed, uncertainty was the only constant. After the flight landed, uncertainty still remains, because the structure that supports this system is not solid. It is reactive. It is built on negotiation, not stability. And negotiation can change at any moment. So here's the message you shouldn't ignore. What you saw today is not the end of a conflict. It is a sign of its continuation. As long as the political climate remains unpredictable, every announcement will carry dual consequences, operational and emotional. This aircraft touched ground, but the tension did not. Which brings us to the social message, the part that matters beyond politics. Policies shift by the hour. Narratives flip overnight. Governments argue in public while negotiating in private. But the real weight falls on the people who move between borders, who live inside bureaucratic decisions, who get caught between two nations trying to protect their image. If you are watching this, remember something. Political tension is loud, but human resilience is louder. And while governments debate, people rebuild, people restart, people return home and continue living. That is the part of the story that never gets reported, but it is the part that defines the future. Subscribe right now and activate alerts. This channel does not repeat the surface narrative. Here you get the deeper layer, the part that reveals how power, policy, and people collide. And this story, this one is far from over.